Hey guys, Wyatt Claypool here. History is already repeating itself between the US and Canada, with the Liberal Party and many of its boosters online thinking that they can actually beat Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives because post Justin Trudeau announcing that he will resign in March and saying he's not going to be running for re-election in his riding of Papineau, the polls have bumped up a little bit for the Liberals. And let me be clear, this is not momentum. This is just the Liberals not being as depressed as they were when Justin Trudeau was still leading the party into the next election. The Liberals were never going to be at 21% in the next federal election. They were always going to gain that election momentum that every party catches as election day nears. 20% was really just demonstrating that there was a lot of Liberals who probably weren't going to show up. But that doesn't mean that now that the polls have bumped up for the Liberals 4 or 5 points, that they're suddenly in the money again. Poilievre and the Conservatives both have a popular leader and a popular brand. The Liberals have a meh brand and they have no leader right now. And do you really think that Mark Carney or Chrystia Freeland, the two most Michael Ignatieff type leadership options, are really going to reignite the Liberal Party's base and then bring on other Canadians that they didn't win last time? Because they have to do better not only than 2021 and 2019, they basically have to have a 2015 style result if they want to stay in government, because the Conservatives are going to gain like massively in terms of voting share as well as raw vote. I want to take you through a couple of these polls. One of them is complete garbage. The second one is more realistic, but it demonstrates that the Liberals are still far from even being competitive in the next federal election. But before we get into that, guys, reminder, if you like this channel and about 70% of you watching this video right now are not yet subscribers, make sure to scroll down and hit the subscribe button, like this video, leave a comment. Who do you think is going to be the next Liberal Party leader? What percentage of the vote do you think the Liberals and the Conservatives are going to have? I would be interested in seeing your guys' thoughts. I always like to scroll through and see what you guys are saying. But now, without further ado, let's move on to the EOS poll from Frank Graves. This one is complete garbage, and I will explain why. So this is the poll result that was just dropped this morning. It shows the Conservative Party of Canada at 39%, which is fairly low considering they've been traveling around the low to mid 40s for quite a while now. The Liberals have jumped to 28%. The NDP are at 17, Bloc at 7, Greens at 5, and PPC at 3. Now, yes, the Liberals were probably going to increase their voting share once Trudeau left. We've been seeing this from other polls saying if Trudeau is replaced by another leader, will you consider voting Liberal? That does increase over what the Liberals were currently polling. But no way the Liberals are suddenly at 20%, 28% overnight. The last EOS poll, I believe, had them at like 24 or 23. 5% did not suddenly decide they like the Liberals, and a bunch of people decide they didn't like the Conservatives. This is what you consider what I would call an unmotivated polling bump. This is a change in polling motivated by nothing, in the sense that, yes, Trudeau is no longer the leader, but why would we assume that the Liberals would be polling better than they were a year ago just because Trudeau resigned? Nothing really has changed about Canada's economy, about immigration policy, about anything else the Liberal government has been doing. They're basically just swapping out the figurehead. Why would that cause a large portion of people to not just start voting Liberal again, but then also saying we're not voting Conservative, we're voting, Liberal or NDP? It doesn't make any sense to me. And when you look at the regionals, it really stops making any sense. So Atlantic Canada, the Liberals are now ahead when in previous EOS polls and all other polls they were behind. They are now ahead by 1%, 39 to 38. They are also ahead in Ontario, 39 to 37, even though as much as I don't like them, Doug Ford's PCs are still polling in the 40s. I don't know why then the Federals, with a far more popular leader than Doug Ford is, would suddenly be behind the Liberals. And this is also something to prove that is probably just a crap poll. If there was going to be a province where the Liberals were ahead of the Conservatives, why wouldn't it be Quebec? Somehow the Conservatives are still ahead of the Liberals, but in second place at 25 to 22, with a Bloc Québécois leading at 33%. You go to Manitoba and Saskatchewan, that one makes sense. Alberta, that one makes sense. BC, that one generally makes sense. But like, I don't really see the big swing that would cause the Liberals to then jump ahead with female voters as well, because women have been actually going more conservative than liberal for over a year now. That's before the leadership crisis. The Conservatives were ahead in all of these regions well before the Liberal leadership crisis. So when the Liberals start coming ahead, this really just demonstrates to me Frank Graves is a bad pollster. Frank Graves often is completely out of step with the polling trends every other pollster has. I'm not one of these people who thinks that polling is rigged. It's just trying to make you vote liberal. But if I was to apply that label of making fake polls to anybody, it would be Frank Graves. Because so often, and it's proven by his bias polling, where he basically polls a bunch of people, or it's his misinformation polling. He polls people on misinformation, what piece of misinformation people believe. And when you look at it, every single question is only stuff where if the person believed the misinformation, they were more likely to be right wing. They do not have anything that causes left wing people. And they didn't bring up any topics that more left wing people tend to believe misinformation about. Frank Graves is entirely comfortable with putting out scuffed polls. And I don't doubt that he hates Poilievre so much, which he absolutely does, that he is willing to cook his samples a little bit, not be so careful about who he's sampling, because maybe he just has a crazy urban sample in this poll and he's just not going to touch it, even though he knows he needs more people in southwestern Ontario and northern Ontario, and he didn't get enough people around the outside, like around the rural areas of the Maritimes. He's just going for whatever he has. So yeah, that to me is not a realistic bump for the Liberals. We are not in an 11-point race at best. The Liberals are behind by still 15%, and that would be considered good for the Liberals at this point. But here are the results from Main Street Research, and I think these are far more realistic. These are this is a poll of all voters, so there is the undecided still added in. But Main Street Research finds that 39% of people are still voting Conservative, 21 Liberal, and I actually find this is a bit too low for the NDP, but only 11% of people thinking about voting for the NDP. We can go check out the with undecideds or leaners added back in. People like, basically, if you were to lean towards one party or another, but you're undecided who you'd be voting for, we then see the Conservatives jump to 42%, Liberals 24%, and NDP 12%. I believe we can also get the one where they just take out all undecideds completely. And then we get the result: 45% Conservative, 26% Liberal, 13% NDP. Again, if I was ballparking this, I think the NDP are more likely around probably 15 or 16%. The NDP base is pretty depressed because now that the Liberals have gotten rid of Trudeau, the NDP is the party with the most unpopular leader. So, yeah, I don't doubt the Liberals have increased. They're no longer depressed, but they're not motivated either. This is what I would consider to be a Kamala Harris mirage. The Liberals are not actually doing well. There's no big movement for the Liberals to be reelected to a fourth term. It's just that there's more Liberals who aren't saying, oh my goodness, I can't vote unless you guys get rid of that Justin guy. But the average moderate voter are all voting Conservative now because they actually want reform. Nobody just wants Carney or Christia at the head of the current government. People hate the current government. And so when I see polls like this where they're getting a bump, it really just tells me that after months of Liberals not even picking up the phone to take polls because everything is so bleak, now that Trudeau has stepped down, you are disproportionately seeing Liberals picking up the phone to answer the polls. And that's why we're going to, in the next few weeks here, if not for a few months, we're going to see the Liberals trend up a little bit. They're not going to overcome the Conservatives. And as election day nears, either they're going to flat line out and stick around 25, 27% of the vote. And then the Conservatives are probably going to go back up to their low 40s, even when you have undecided voters added in. Again, people vote for outcomes for the most part. And right now, most people want taxes lowered. They want the government to crack down on crime. They think the economy is overregulated. They think we spend too much. This is what voters want. Mark Carney and Chrystia Freeland even seem to understand that this is what voters want. That's why both of them are now running against the consumer carbon tax. I don't think it's going to save them, but even they understand that the zeitgeist of voters right now is reform, is smaller government, is not doing things the way that the liberal government is doing. So I do not see the liberals, unless the new leader comes in, and it's going to be Carney and Freeland, and they do not have the capacity to change very much. But if they had a new leader who suddenly threw everything in the kitchen sink out and started policy from scratch, lower tax, all that stuff, maybe the liberals would have a chance against the conservatives. But right now, no, the liberals are not in a situation where they can actually win. That EOS poll, when people ran it through their models, showed the conservatives only winning 166 seats and the liberals winning like 122, and it was going to be like a minority conservative government. Nah, the liberals are not going to be able to claw back that many seats. Tell me the areas of the country where people are feeling more positive. Because unless people are feeling positive, they don't show up. Again, it's a classic thing in American politics that during the midterms, if the president has a below, it has a bad net negative approval rating, no chance they're holding on to the House and the Senate. Right now, poll the government's approval rating in Canada, and it's abysmal. In fact, I actually want to bring that up right now. Let's look at the last Abacus data poll that just came out a few days ago, because they usually poll government approval rating as well as the approval rating of the leader. This is on the 7th, so this is the day Justin Trudeau resigned, or I think the day after he resigned, they released this quick spot poll. And the government approval rating number was horrific here. Okay, wait. See, the government approval, if I can bring this up on screen, is literally is only 21%. Only 21% of people on January 9th approve of the government. 63% disapprove of the government. That number, for context, for the liberals to be able to do well, would probably need to fall down to a disapproval of maybe only 40%. Because in Canada, there always generally is more disapproval than there is the capacity for approval. Because in the United States, it's 50-50. So usually about half of people like you. And then if you can claw some other party people away, you can have more than half. So in Canada, with like 5 or 6 parties, it's difficult to be really well liked. But if you're going to win, you got to be north when it comes to your approval of probably 35%, and you got to be south of probably 40 or 45% in terms of the disapproval. And so I don't see these fundamental problems solving themselves for the liberals. If the economy sucks, what's Mark Carney going to say? Well, re-elect us because we have a new figurehead? Not happening. Same thing with Chrystia Freeland. Same thing with anyone the liberals might run. The only way the liberals do significantly better in this next election than the previous polls were saying is if they gobble up the NDP's voter base, because everyone hates Jagmeet Singh so much with them, but that still doesn't get them in punching distance of the conservatives. But anyways, I want to end this video off with just a note about Mark Carney's disaster of a campaign launch in Edmonton, because there's this little piece of data I think is very telling about the weakness of him as a candidate, and why I genuinely think that Chrystia Freeland, as boring and as beige of a personality as she has, although same thing is true about Carney, but he has a lot of boosters on his side, Team Trudeau behind him, massive political machine, Jon Stewart, Michael Bloomberg for some reason. Despite all of his advantages, he could still be beaten by Freeland. And I think a great piece of data to prove why is his fundraising numbers in the first 24 hours. He was able to fundraise in the first day, which is not an insignificant amount of money, but in 24 hours of launching his campaign, he raised $125,000. Now, again, that sounds like a lot, but do you know how many maxed out, like the federal maximum, how many of those donations that's worth? Only about 71. So 71 maxed out donations. I know not all of them will be maxed out, but that's a pretty paltry amount of money. If you're Mark Carney, soft launched your campaign on The Daily Show, have been planning on running for probably the last few months, have a Rolodex of thousands of people who could easily cut him a check if they wanted to, and it wouldn't even matter to them. $1,750 is nothing to them. That he was only able to get 71, the equivalent of 71 maxed out donors. That's crazy bad. That's pathetic. I've seen fundraisers that Polyev has done that were well into him being leader. This wasn't like honeymoon period of his leadership and everyone wants to throw money at him. I mean, this is like more than 2 years on to his leadership. He'll host fundraisers where he'll bring in more than $200,000 in a night with only having people from the local area show up and donate. That's crazy on behalf of Mark Carney to only bring in that little across the entire country. They would have sent out emails to people. They would have been probably doing personal phone calls. They would have been digging into their network. And there are tons of donors who I imagine are sitting back thinking, well, Chrystia Freeland is announcing on Sunday. Let's see if her announcement goes better than his, because his lacked energy. He, in fact, has already had to change his party logo because his previous Mark Carney leadership logo was like actually violating the copyright of Metacredit, which ironically is a debt recovery service. So he should have just made the slogan, "I'm here to collect." That would have been very funny. But Mark Carney is just a wet sandwich of a candidate. He is not going to do well on a debate stage, and I've heard his French is abysmal. And while I'm an English Canadian in Alberta who thinks that the French language in Canadian politics is way overemphasized, there's just so many parts of the country that French language literacy is not very useful. But still, if you're running in the Liberal leadership, and you can't speak French, that's insane. You're the party of Montreal and you can't speak French very well, and you're supposed to be the big, technocrat unifier for the party, and you don't have the technical skill of French? Give up. Throw in the towel, man. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Yes, you might be able to win, but the fact Freeland already has more endorsements than you do is insane. I also heard that Karina Gould actually might be in the race only to help out Carney. But even then, I don't really get that strategy. I get it from Freeland's perspective of having other MPs run, gather up support in their communities, and then throw it to her. But Karina Gould has the same appeal as Chrystia Freeland, and that might dig into Freeland's numbers. But as soon as you get to a second ballot, the Gould people are throwing their support to Freeland probably because Carney is not does not have a strong association with Freeland or Gould. So Freeland and Gould's votes, I think, actually go between each other far more easily, even though I also think that even if Karina Gould endorses Carney as a second choice, I still think most of them would go to Freeland because they are like identical candidates. Anyways, so that's it for me today, guys. Yes, the Liberals have a polling bump. No, it does not change very much, and we will see probably this polling bump fade over time. The Liberals were never going to do as bad as 21%, but they're also probably not going to be within 10 to even 13 points of the Conservatives. They're going to be further behind than even that. This is going to be a Michael Ignatieff style crushing of the Liberal Party. I guarantee they probably don't even end up competing in the next election after this one. They're going to be in bad shape. So anyways, that's it for me, guys. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. I have a goal of getting to 100,000 subscribers by mid-December, so anything you can do to help me out with that, I greatly appreciate. If I don't make it, I owe all my friends dinner, so I guess the strategy is either subscribe to the channel and help me out, or befriend me, don't subscribe, and hope that I buy you dinner. Anyways, see you guys later.